and welcome to another episode of FooBar. Today I want to start a brand new series. I want to talk about step functions. I know there are many videos related to step functions in this channel, but I want to create a cohesive playlist for those that are learning the service. I have been talking a lot about new features and new launches, but I want to rewind a little bit and start from the start. In this playlist that you can find in the description box already, you will find all the features that are related to step functions and all the existing videos, and I will be updating that playlist with all the new videos that are coming in the next weeks. In this video, this is the introductory video on step functions. We are going to learn what are step functions, when to use them, and what are the benefits of using step functions. So let's get started. So the first question that you might have is, what are step functions? AWS Step Functions is a serverless workflow service that makes it easy to coordinate multiple AWS services and your own applications into scalable serverless workflows. With step functions, you can design and run workflows that stitch together services like Lambda, Fargate, and third-party APIs. Workflows are made of steps that can invoke these services using an API in a reliable and scalable manner. Step functions uses visual workflows that are made of a series of steps, as I said. Each step performs a discrete operation, such as running a Lambda function, or making an API call to Dynamo, or starting a Fargate task, or calling a third-party API. And these steps can be connected through flow mechanisms. Either you can pass the state to the next one linearly, or you can create multiple parallel branches, or you can execute the same steps to all the elements into an array, and you can build these very complicated applications that are visually very easy to visualize. Later on this series, we are going to talk about the different type of states, so that's something I will show you, I think, in the next video already. Step functions also does a lot of the error handling, so it triggers and tracks every state, it retries if you tell them, it follows the workflow's definition, and it makes sure that the steps are executing correctly. If not, you have a lot of error handling mechanisms that we are going to see later in this series as well, like retries, redrive, timeouts, and catch and tries and things like that. So when I say visual workflow, this means that you can see the workflow you are working from the AWS console or using the plugins that I have talked in a previous video with the Visual Studio IDE that you can visualize the state machine. This service that is called the Workflow Studio will allow you to visualize the workflow. And it's not only a visualization capability, you can also build these workflows using this low-code tool and basically do drag and drop the different components, the different APIs, and some of these already comes with a lot of pre-configured things, so you just need to fill very few details in order to get a working application. You can find that these services to functions integrates with over 200 AWS services. So it's very simple to do all these calls without relying on a compute service like containers or functions to call the AWS SDK. And because it comes also with HTTP support, you can connect to third-party services, you can do some sanitization of the inputs and outputs as well with the state management that we are going to see later in this series, and you can build pretty interesting workflows. If you want to learn more about the Workflow Studio, I will leave you a link in the description, and also I will leave you another link in the description for the App Composer and Workflow Studio combo. So if you want to work in your IDE and you want to work as infrastructure as code combined with this Workflow Studio, you can do that as well. So the links are in the description box. The workflow in the Workflow Studio, or you can define it in your IDE, you can do it as infrastructure as code. The Workflow Studio will also produce infrastructure as code, so it's just a representation of this infrastructure, of these states. And for that, step functions use a language called
ASL, Amazon State Language. And this is a kind of JSON that can be also transferred to, that is used to define the whole workflow and the different states. So you can also use CDK that will end up in being ASL or the data science CDK to define the state machines. But in my opinion, it's always nicer to do it in ASL if you can, because then you can see it in the console, you can see it in Workflow Studio, and everything works together very nicely. So in this slide, you can see how ASL looks. This is a JSON version of ASL, and you can see that it's basically an array of states with states definition. That's a workflow, and you can see the different types of states that they have a little different definition depending on what kind of states it is. We are going to see more details about states later, but I'm not going to give you a course on ASL. There is a nice documentation page, and it's pretty easy to understand how to define these states. There is a really good definition there, so I will leave you the link in the description box to the specification of the ASL. One of my favorite characteristics of step functions is that it shows you visually how each execution runs. So after you run a workflow, you can see if the state workflow fail or succeed. And then you can click inside each of these executions, and you can see an end-to-end trace of each of the workflows, and you can see the inputs and outputs for each state. So for example, in this case that you're seeing in the screen, for that Dynamo API GET, we are seeing the input and the output, and basically you don't need to print stuff in your logs or check logs or anything like that. All of that comes from the execution and monitoring in the console, so it's pretty neat. Now, you might be wondering when to use step functions. Step functions has a lot of different use cases. I will say that microservice orchestration is one of my favorites because I'm a developer and I love to build using step functions. So instead of having a big function or a big application that does everything, I like to break my task or my microservices into step functions that do things. And then you can have these individual little functions that really do your business logic in particular, and then use the APIs to call the different integrations. I have a whole video talking about this particular pattern that is called orchestration versus choreography. I will leave it in the description box below if you like to dive deep on what this means. Another use case that is very common from our customers, from AWS customers, is batch processing. Step functions is great to process large batches of data. You can process thousands of images or text directly from S3, and it's possible to create really interesting workflows for your data. We launched distributed mapping last reInvent, not this year, like 1 year ago, that allows you to run in parallel 10,000 tracks. So you can apply the same operation to 10,000 things at the same time directly from S3. So that brings a lot of power to your state machine to run these batch operations. And if you want to learn more about the distributed map, I have a link for that as well in the description box. In line with the previous use case, that is batch processing, I will say data migration is a very common use case. And this is to do large data migrations from one database to another, from one storage to another. And for example, I have done an example, I have talked about this in more detail when I talk about migrating data to Dynamo and how you can leverage step functions and distributed map to do so because of this capability of large parallel processing. So I will leave you the link in the description box for that use case. Another use case that is very commonly used by step function customers is the machine learning workflows. So here you can build workflows that are solving end-to-end ML workflows that combine the data preparation, model training, evaluation, deployment, retraining, and whatever you need. I wrote a blog post about how one of our step function customers is using this in real life and what are the benefits that they achieve of picking step functions through other orchestration services. I will leave you the link in the description box. And finally, I would like to add the manual processes. Manual processes are a little bit tedious sometimes to implement when we have normal applications, but with step functions it's pretty straightforward. A normal standard step function can run for 1 year and it can be paused while manual operation is we are waiting for that. So it's a great solution using events and the state machine. So you can, for example, start an activity that requires a user to validate a form or to produce something and click a button. And then when they click that button, the state machine can resume its work. For example, in Serverless Espresso, that is one of the demos that we have built in the developer advocacy team in Serverless, we use this functionality for our solution. When the customers are ordering a coffee, they have 5 minutes to proceed to order the coffee. If not, this manual operation will time out because this is built into step functions. You can do that. And then when they pick the coffee, the state machine will be paused while they are picking, and then when they pick, the state machine resumes. And the same happens with the barista. When the coffee is ready to be prepared, well, the barista will say, I'm preparing this coffee. The state machine will pause until the barista tells the state machine that the coffee has been completed, and then the state machine resumes. And again, there is a timeout of 15 minutes if the barista doesn't complete that task in that allocated time. If you want to learn more about how we build Serverless Espresso and what is behind that, I'll leave you a link in the description box. So you can see I have links for almost all the different patterns. If you arrive here, you might be wondering, step function sounds cool, but I want to summarize some of the benefits just in case you didn't grasp how cool is this service. For example, if you use it to build the microservice example, using orchestration of microservices instead of building the whole application, using a function or a container, you can find that you can avoid a lot of the boilerplate that you need to invoke, for example, the AWS SDK. In here that you are seeing in the screen, you can see an example of the piece of code, 20 lines of code that you need in order to do a get item in DynamoDB. If you look at that code, it doesn't do anything relatively important to your business. It's just boilerplate. You just want to get the item, you know the partition key, you know the sort key, but you need to write all this code in order to get that. So this is a lot of code that you need to maintain, that you need to test, that you need to make sure that everything is right. What if you do it with step functions instead? You can basically call directly from step functions the API for get item for Dynamo. You pass the primary key, you pass the sort key, it will do everything for you. No need to write any code. And in this way, you can basically remove a lot of unnecessary code. At the end, you will end up with very few functions or container tasks that are doing very specific things, really important and critical for your business. And that's the code you want to maintain. That's the code you want to test. That's the code you want to pay a lot of attention because that's the critical part for your application. And the cool thing is that because these little functions or tasks in container are so small and they don't have that much boilerplate, you can reutilize it in different instances where you need them all around your application. Another benefit that is related to the visual workflow is that it's easier to understand an application that is displayed visually. It's much easier if you put the right names and you visualize the whole application in the Workflow Studio, for example, to understand what an application is doing 6-12 months ahead in the future. When you come back to a piece of code, you might need to add comments, you might need to navigate a little bit into the files to understand what is going on. But when you open one workflow, you really can see what is going on. So for me, that's a very important benefit because my future self is always happy to know what is happening. Another benefit that I love from step functions is that it comes with a lot of built-in error handling mechanisms, retries, catch methods, if something fails, timeouts, as I was saying with Serverless Espresso, redrive from the last failure. I will leave you the blog post of that launch in the description box. You can combine them all into solving your problem, and you don't need to code those solutions. Those are built into state machines. I will make a video only about error handling later in the series, so stay tuned for that. I already mentioned that step functions allows you to visualize end-to-end trains of each execution. This is a huge benefit, thus you can have a clear visibility of your workflows. This is great for auditability and to understand what is going on in your processes. And finally, I would like to mention a benefit from Step Functions, that is the scalability. Step Functions is super serverless in the sense that you don't even need to provision memory. It will allocate it for you automatically. This is like a compute service in a way, if you like to say it like that, because there is some memory allocated in the back, and it will scale automatically and as the traffic increase and the size of your payloads are big. So you don't need to provision any servers. There is no cold starts. There is no, like we have with functions or with containers. And the cool thing is that when you're working with Step Functions, the latency is quite stable, no matter if you have a few requests or if you have a lot. So this is something that is really, really cool when you build your applications using Step Functions. It's a benefit that a lot of customers don't realize that they are getting until they start load testing their applications. And if you want to understand what are the limits of Step Functions, I will leave you a link from the documentation so you can understand what are your soft limits, where you can increase them, and also what are the capabilities of Step Functions. And that's the video for me today. This is the first video in this series. I hope you like it. Give it a thumbs up if you learned something new. And in the next video, we are going to talk about some important concepts that you need to know in order when working with Step Functions. So we are covering some ground in order to start building more details in the future videos. In here, I leave you the playlist where all these videos are going to be uploaded, the old ones talking about features and the new ones that are coming out. And in here, you can find the video about Workflow Studio in Visual Studio Code, launched just in re:Invent. It's really, really cool. And for me, it's one of my favorite features because I can switch around in the same IDE. I don't need to go back to the AWS console. And with that, I will see you in another episode of FooBar. Ciao, ciao!